thank you, Al. Will, I'm glad that we were able to get the panel changed so you can get your flight this evening. Glad to help out there. Thanks for having us, and thanks for the characteristically dramatic title to this session. Because I think actually we've got the perfect panel to address it, in that we have here some leading operators who have been in the industry a while, who know it back to front, and who can certainly either sort of challenge or welcome the assertion that we are going to see a revolution in this space. So, without putting the words in their mouths, I think it's better that they provide you with a brief introduction to what they do and what their service is to business aviation. So, Glen, why don't I start with you?
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Glen Heavens. I'm the founder of Synergy Aviation and also involved in some aviation investments as well. We've been flying aeroplanes with pilots in them, not particularly autonomously, for 15 years now.
Christophe Lapierre from Luxaviation Group, so we are an operator as well for business jets and helicopters, still with pilots, both of them. Also FBO network.
I'm Will Fanshawe from Halo Aviation. I set up Halo 10 years ago as a helicopter management and charter company. We operate 7109s, 3169s around the London area, doing what helicopters you guys are looking at doing with electric vehicles very shortly, hopefully.
I mean, earlier we had an interesting question survey come up that said that for entrepreneurs, amongst their top three concerns, that getting funding, that represented 63% according to the audience. 30% of the concerns were around infrastructure, only 7% around regulation. So why don't we tackle the third question on our panel list first, and Will, why don't you start off there and give us your impressions on how big the regulatory hurdles are, for your business as it is now, and for the sort of eVTOL operations that are aspiring to grow the business.
So we obviously operate under an AOC, a commercial air transport operator's license, which allows us to do quite a lot. So we can take fare-paying passengers, and looking in the urban, we can come into London, we can land at Battersea for the sake of London. There's a landing site on the Isle of Dogs we can land at, although it's very restrictive and it's non-licensed. But in certain aircraft, in certain formats, you can go in there. And then we can self-certify us to land in a congested area at a cricket pitch or a sports pitch. So we can do that today. And we were going through our CAA audit last week, and I said to our ops inspector, I said, so what's to stop us taking an eVTOL? And first of all, he paused and he goes, eVTOL? Oh, yeah, eVTOL. So that didn't give me a huge amount of encouragement, but he assured me there was a group at the CA that were looking at it, and hopefully we'll start to engage with them. But his view was, well, you've got an operator certificate. If the aircraft is licensed by EASA, the pilots are trained to EASA standard. There's no reason why legally you can't continue to do what you do. And that's basically why we're taking a great interest in eVTOL and all the great programs we've seen over the last couple of days. Because in our view, we have to accept change. Why are you going to jump in our case, a €6 million helicopter when you can buy one at a fraction of the cost, operate it at a fraction of the cost, and one day maybe even get rid of the pilot? So for us, we want to track the movement of the eVTOL industry, and hopefully when they come to market, we'll be there ready to operate them. Can we get rid of pilots? I think we all agree that will happen fairly soon, but not in the first stages. And as a business owner, give you an idea of the cost of current pilot training. Let's not talk about what it costs to get to become a certified instrument-rated pilot under EASA rules, the varying numbers depending on whether you do it yourself or whether you go through the military. But for one pilot, professional pilot, to go from a 109 to a 169 type rating, so a 6-seater to an 8-seater aircraft, cost me €50,000 for that training course. It takes 5 weeks. And I lose a pilot for 5 weeks. They go and eat pasta and drink good Italian wine in Milan and come back slightly tubbier 5 weeks later. with a great type certificate. But those are the issues. I mean, that's just a transfer from one helicopter to another. You know, we can all fly it. We can all jump in and fly it after 20 minutes. It's learning the systems. And so simplified systems, people were talking earlier yesterday about making them all similar. Leonardo have La Familia, which is meant to be a family of helicopters with similar controls. It still takes 5 weeks to transfer from one to the other. So from an operator's side, yeah, please make them commonality of controls. That would be really helpful. But yeah, pilots, I think we'll see them for a while yet. And once you either downgrade the competency required of the pilots, or indeed you get rid of them, there'll always be somebody who needs to carry the bags.
Christophe, one of the motivating factors, so we understand for the acquisitions that Luxaviation has made, is that the industry is fragmented and small operators, amongst other things, can't cope with the regulatory burdens upon them. So with the experience that you have of global operations, different sectors of the supply side, do you think that the dreamers, the innovators, the entrepreneurs that are getting into eVTOL are seriously underestimating that challenge of managing the regulator and enforcing the changes?
I think it will come, but the timeline is probably way out and not really the one we're talking here in these conferences. Just thinking backward, early days as a pilot, the first time you start on a small plane, then you come on one day doing a Cat 3 landing with full automation. So the automation, the first time you experience it, it's absolutely fantastic. When you think about the technology, it was already delivered in the commercial environment in the 80s. So it means the automation and the technology is already there for a while. So what is missing here to get rid of all the pilots and to address all the regulatory requirements is how safety is addressed over the full chain. The regulator comes to audit, one operator comes to audit a training center, there's a licensing office. So each and every step is being regulated, and how tomorrow all the ATC and all the operations can be, all the risk and all the accountability can be transferred on algorithm and move out of this is really the question that we are not addressing enough. Only just the reliability of a system, but the regulator will be looking at something else.
I mean, Glen, can you talk more to that point? The pilot automation. What are the issues that haven't been exposed in the last 2 days when it comes to managing that in the future?
I think public perception is going to be a huge one. When we saw the single engine operations become legal last year, whenever it was, it would be interesting to ask a load of people flying on EasyJet if they feel just as comfortable getting on an Airbus with one engine, let alone now getting into aircraft with no pilots on board at all. Airbus has done a lot of work about having just one operator on the aircraft, and then the rest is handled remotely from the ground. The technology is already there, but there's a lot of sugarcoating going on in all of this. And I mean, one good example is none of us look like those pictures up there. So all that appears nice and glossy and pretty isn't necessarily. But actually getting people to board these aircraft, I think, is a long, long way off.
Glen, you've got to be happy you don't actually look like that.
I'm happier I don't look like that.
Public acceptance. Will tell us more about heli operations, and in particular the limitations you have in London, and what those issues are, and how eVTOL would perhaps address those or not.
Yeah, for us, obviously one landing site, commercial landing site in London, about £780 a landing for a 109, 15 minutes of parking time, and then you're on £350 an hour after that. So we're fairly limited where we go. We do try and push the boundaries. We found a really good site up at UCS in Hampstead this year. We did 2 landings there, mid-afternoon, didn't upset anybody, grey day in London, nobody in the park, in the sports field we landed at. Some chap decided, right, I'm going to write to my MP, and I'll write to the newspaper. The MP then picks up the phone. He goes to the head of the CAA. The CAA rings down to flight ops department. Head of flight ops department rings me. Is this one of your helicopters landed? Yeah. Are you happy? Yeah. Is it big enough? Yeah, it's a big football field. I then have to write an email. He then writes an email to the head of the CA. CA goes back to the MP. The pressure goes on the school that have very kindly allowed us for a nice donation to their sports fund. They say it's just too difficult. You know, we don't want to upset the locals. No more landing sites. That's what we face. Noise is the issue. I don't know when we solve the noise issue, whether it will be visual pollution. My blue sky is ruined by an aircraft flying across it. And then after that, we probably get to the meat of what is actually stopping helicopter operations, and that's envy. So the only way you're going to get rid of envy is to reduce the price and make it more affordable. So noise, yes. Affordability, yes. I'm back in London next week. Tuesday, my favourite event is the London Heliport Consultative Group, where I get tomatoes thrown at me as one of the operators represented on the board as we go through all the noise complaints for London over the last 6 months. A really fun evening. You get a soggy sandwich from Wandsworth Borough Council. But the good thing is I'll be saying, well, if my final closing any other business, well, yeah, it's great that this April we can celebrate 60 years of the heliport. I know this is a picture of it. And 60 years ago, London Heliport, and it's worth going on YouTube to see the Westlands initial video of them opening the heliport. It's an industrial wasteland, not a house in sight. It's a great bit of footage. 60 years ago, there were no houses. And hopefully, I'll be able to say, the good thing is last week I was at this great event where you got good lunch, plenty of coffee, and actually, they're producing vehicles that are going to be quieter. They're going to be less disturbance, and so hopefully that will be good news for them. But those are the issues we face, the big issues.
Christophe, just moving on to the automation of operations, what kind of potential do you see there, and is it such that the whole way in which operators are organised and staff will completely change as the platform for actually operating aircraft is digitised and automated?
I think there are already a lot of products out there, and there's already a large degree of automation in all the software available. Now, in the diversity of this software, most of them are very specific, addressing one specific item. So either all the accounting for the management, or all the charter part, or all the crewing, or only dedicated to the maintenance. Some are broader, of course, and all are looking at providing the full value chain. But there's not one, particularly in our case, there's not one solution that fits exactly all the requirements and all the business model that we have in all the management requirements with the owners. So I think there's still much more space for automation in that regard, and we do believe as well that the capability to pick and select different modules will be really a next step, and that we'll see more and more interactions with pieces of software very specialized in one segment of the activity, and you will be able to compile them all together through APIs or whatever.
And Glen, when you're focused on the P&L of operating aircraft every day, what do you see as a sort of the breakthrough in terms of a genuine revolution, or at least a decent evolution in the way that you can operate aircraft? Is it more in the vehicle or more on the support side?
Firstly, I don't think there is a revolution. I think change is coming, but it's going to be both. There's cost, there's human cost, which these projects will reduce, and the actual cost of running the aircraft as well as the acquisition. So it very much is a hardware, software, and the fleshy bit, really. So all three will contribute. And I think we'll probably see certain segments move forward a lot quicker than others, and whether the whole aim of, if you call it the project of the eVTOL, etc., will come together in its entirety, I'm yet to be convinced.
I mean, Christophe, do you think that, even in terms of business culture, the business aviation market we know now is equipped to change fast enough to absorb these new operating models?
I see a lot of similarities in the business model from the first ones. And Steve was asking the question this morning, do you think that some private individuals will be amongst the first owners of such platforms? I personally believe either big corporations led by Citi or private individuals will be the first one to access this kind of platform. So here I see no big step in the really being able to operate such models. If it comes in terms of certification in a similar way, if everything is certified, then it's very usual process. There's type rating, the training, the platform is approved, and the procedures remain exactly the same. The big step will be with the full automation. Yes, here that's a giant step and totally unknown for now.
And you know, Will, you're basically a pathfinder for some of these business models, because you know, effectively change the vehicle and they would adopt quite a lot of the same operating model you have right now. How would you see the business models evolving? I mean, we've heard today about the need for a sort of, you know, incremental series of steps, you know, as a sort of cargo operator or first as a VIP operator. Do you see that as well, or do you see already a route to becoming a more of a sort of mass transportation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the market is there if the price comes down on what you're trying to achieve. I mean, certainly, you know, if you could afford to run helicopters in and out of London at the price you can do in New York, where landing fees are very cheap, then yeah, people will of course use them. And yeah, the technology to be able to book them quickly. I mean, what Blade have done in the US is good. I mean, it hasn't been great for the operators, I understand, over there. They've been, you know, their prices have been pushed down, but I think there's a bounce back that will affect that. But yeah, people will jump in them and use them. I mean, the flight time from, you know, Gatwick into London's 7-8 minutes, so you would definitely use them. But at the moment, you know, we're limited with our infrastructure here. And Battersea, I didn't mention, is limited to 6,000 landings. So 6,000 landings, 6,000 takeoffs a year. So and they've got to make a buck. I think they spent 35 million buying it a few years ago. So, you know, you've got to make money out of that. You know, you're not going to do it on a Blade model. It's the problem.
I mean, okay, so these guys have got so much experience and expertise, we should let the audience throw some questions at them. Do we have any already? Come on, Glen.
No, but whoever wrote that is not the first to say that.
So yeah, let's look at the noise question. You know, first of all, Will, just, you know, in answering this question, can you also tell us, like, how much bigger could your operation be with, you know, with a vehicle that reduced noise emissions by, you know, whatever, 20, 30, 50%?
Well, if noise was taken completely out of the equation, then there's no reason why you couldn't use rooftops in London. There are, as been identified, there are some out there, because the only reason they're not being used, they're not regulatory, they're big enough for under EASA certification, the aircraft are capable of landing on them, they just fall foul of the planning rules. So yeah, if you took noise out, then you certainly could go to a lot more. I think you probably have a model more similar to a city which has access, like, you know, New York is, you know, very, very busy, and similar size of city, and similar problems in getting places. So
following from that, do you think that there are that sort of the eVTOL will materialize probably not in London or in the UK, or quite possibly not in the US either, for those sorts of reasons?
I think the US is well up for it. I think aviation has always been led in the US. I think obviously Middle East is another great. I mean, I think it will come to London, but I think it won't be on the mass transit initially until, you know, everyone is doing it around the rest of the world, and people expect, you know, a hotel in London will say, well, hang on, all our chain in New York has a rooftop landing pad. Why hasn't it got one in London? And the pressure will be put on for the planners that they will have to move, because there's nothing legally, there's no reason why you couldn't. It's pure noise is the issue, until they think of something else.
There you go. Do we have another question following on? Okay, so we got one for you there, Christophe, in terms of Luxaviation, and yeah, I mean it's interesting that your growth so far has been very much through acquiring other established operators, but we've seen other players in the industry start to make big investments in tech platforms like, you know, Vista in TechX, for example. Do you think Luxaviation is, perhaps working on this now, or maybe missing an opportunity to invest more in these, coming technological opportunities such as automation?
So the consolidation, that's a process we started, and we're still in the middle of it, so that will continue. In terms of automation, we looked at different projects. We started working on it. It's not exactly our core expertise, but we are looking more at projects that to enhance and to change the business model for the natural evolution that we're in. And I think it's where we are today. We are not an IT and software company. We are looking heavily into mastering our own data, in collecting more data, in learning how to use better our own data. We have a lot, and to become more efficient ourselves. It's more business intelligence. It's not really automation, and that's where we are today.
Perhaps, Glen, I can get your opinion on the UK CAA question here. Broadly speaking, first, you work, I'm sure, quite closely with the CAA and other regulators. How well equipped are they to facilitate the path towards eVTOLs?
I think they're very badly resourced. That's been a problem certainly with the UK CAA, and I see it in other regulators around the world, that they just don't have the resource that they need to do effectively what they currently do. So then moving on from that to try and come up with a whole new set of rules for a whole new set of aircraft is going to be very, very challenging for them. And the question here mentions in the next 2 years. I don't think, from what we've seen, that 2 years is going to be the right sort of timescale for some of these things to actually be flying. So they don't have the resource at the moment. I'm not sure where they're going to get that resource, because the pressure for them to do so isn't there at the moment.
I mean, Christophe, does this have to be industry led? I mean, the big organisations like yours are presumably best placed to get the absolutely urgent requirements from operators that want to enter this space and start representing that to the regulator.
I think that's also one of the reasons why we're here. We try to present in all these kind of communities to support and to bring all the feedback and the experience we got from the different operations. But I think it will be a common effort with all the supply chain, the operators, and of course the regulator. Because I think what we need to reinvent is all this accountability for the safety that is today spread over the full chain, that needs to be reinvented.
I mean, tackling the last question there, Will. London and its helicopter plans. I mean, the mayor of London doesn't envisage any new helicopter channels in London, and it's not even part of the transportation argument, right, for the next sort of 30-year plan.
It isn't at the moment. The word from above coming down into the CAA again. Our ops inspection last week, they started talking about noise and, hey, well, what's that to do with the CAA? You're there for safety. Noise, as far as I know, is not safety. But the pressure from above to reduce what's going on at the moment is huge. So trying to expand that, I think we'll struggle, certainly on helicopters. I think the approach is to get some planning permissions out there, get an agreement, okay, if it operates at this noise level, can't be heard from street level, then yeah, you can operate. And that may be in the next couple of years, and the planning sits in place until an aircraft then can achieve that, which I'm sure they will. But yeah, the pressure is to reduce helicopter activity over London at the moment.
So Glenn, with your worldly perspective on business aviation, which players are really going to push this through if it is going to work? Will it be going all the way up to the OEMs? Will it be the big biz-av groups like Luxaviation, or will it be the kind of the specialist or innovating entrepreneurs coming onto the scene?
It's very hard to say because there's so many variables and so many different options of how this section of the market will go. But I think we're going to see new manufacturers. It's interesting Airbus has launched their vehicle, but I think we're going to see companies that we've never heard of before entering into this market, and that's partly because the technologies will be carried forward from elsewhere. Essentially, the biggest issue seems to be storing this electricity stuff. Once that can be mastered, the motors are there. Most of the automation is actually already in use, and aircraft can fly perfectly well from London to New York without anyone touching a button if needs be. And I think that was first done in the 70s, the mid-70s. So bringing it all together, I think, is the key. And it may be that it's a company or a business that none of us have heard of that perhaps come from another industry, but then bring together all the individual elements that are needed to move forward.
Right, and this Uber company, whatever they're called.
Heard of them.
Do we have other questions, or any directly from the audience?
Yeah, I have a question about how difficult it will be for existing operators to move to an environment where cost is much more important. So if you look at commercial aviation, the low-cost models just resulted in an entirely new set of operators. And the existing operators that tried to set up low-cost operations, whether it's British Air or Continental or United, they all failed at that. So why could it be different for charter operators and current helicopter companies to take advantage of these technological changes instead of, finding that a difficult enterprise going forward?
Very good. Christophe, why don't you have a crack at that first?
I think the pressure on cost has always been there and is still very present today. That's one of the drivers of the consolidation. Now, what maybe is part of the answer of what you're addressing, we clearly see more and more a split in terms of optimization of the cost between the charter companies and the management companies, really to specialize the business models towards the cost efficiency you're talking about. And I think that's the first answer, where the operators are specializing, either splitting in different branches or different divisions, or a more specialized operator dedicated to one market segment. And I think it's going in the direction that you're saying.
There probably will be some operators as well that think, it's never going to happen, no, it's never going to happen, and don't really worry too much about the segment, and then suddenly look around and it's happening all around them. So there is a danger. Whilst I personally believe that the timescale is quite a long way away, the closer we get to wherever that time is when these vehicles will be available and operators will be operating them, the rate that it moves towards that will be exponential. I think it'll just start snowballing, getting faster and faster.
But we're looking at your fleet, which is probably quite sort of typical of a lot of other fleets, including Luxaviation fleet, where you've got most of your aircraft managed on behalf of owners, and you've got some spare capacity for charter. I mean, if you look at that as a characteristic across the industry, that's hardly a good platform for becoming the equivalent of low-cost carrier, because you just don't have the flexibility. Do you think is that a fundamental problem for operators, grabbing this new opportunity?
I think you can own your own aircraft. We prefer not to because of the cost of them, and the market that that is addressable out there. But I think as costs come down, certainly we as an operator will be looking to have our own aircraft and operate them exclusively on charter, certainly.
Do we have other questions directly from the audience? Al, how are we doing for time?
Yep, you've got one question from Cameron Spencer. That's just come up.
Right. Okay. Well, Will, you can carry on talking then, because that'd be an interesting one for you to address.
So, smaller eVTOL, we could fly smaller ones. I think kind of the numbers, probably 4 to 6 seats is probably where we're at. I mean, our average loading is about just under 3 passengers in the aircraft that we tend to fly around. We've got 6-seat and 8-seat passenger configurations. Are we equipped to manage fleets? Yeah, it's pretty scalable. At the moment, the biggest hurdle is getting quality of pilots in, and for the passengers, certainly those that fly regularly, they take a very great interest in who's flying them. They definitely want to know before they fly, who am I flying with today? Which, when you get on a commercial aircraft, you probably don't ask that question, but they want to know where they've been trained, because sadly over the last 20 years, helicopters have fallen out of the sky, and when they do, more often than not, it's pilot error.
So, Will, if you had to take an eVTOL model into your fleet in the next few years, which one would it be?
We don't want to upset too many people. I think the one that's attracted my attention is Bell Nexus. I think if a company can build a marinized foldable tilt rotor that works on and offshore, it's maybe a bit flippant to say that it's a kind of a grad program to produce the Nexus. It looks quite straightforward in comparing what they've done before. I'm sure it's not. That's why I'm an operator, not a manufacturer. But yeah, I'd probably pin my hopes on that at the moment.
Okay, interesting one. So look, as we're sort of winding up, and Al's put this question down as well. Just looking at the theme we've been discussing, Glen, do you think that automated operations, particularly pilotless flight, is perhaps a bit of a red herring at this point in the development of eVTOLs, simply because it's at least perhaps 10 years out? I don't want to put words in your mouth. And other things can happen first before that's really properly tackled.
The automation and removing the pilot is purely a function of cost. It's not going to be about safety. There's statistics that will prove that human error causes more accidents than technology, but by the same token, technology has caused many accidents, and actually it's the interpretation of the technology by the human that causes the problem. So, interestingly, I wonder whether the driver behind all this, and I think it comes down to one of two things, is either cost or convenience. And the main driver for removing the pilot is cost, and actually just the sheer numbers. If we're, look at some of the videos that Dubai has put out with having these things flying around absolutely everywhere, there aren't enough people that will be able to have a career flying those things, so it has to be autonomous. And again, I think saying should we put our colleagues or our kids, we could try a show of hands around the room, but I'm not sure everyone would vote accordingly. But I certainly wouldn't want to get on something that's going to go up in the sky that didn't have somebody there operating it. I also wonder why all our trains aren't completely autonomous. I know we have many of them, but is that where autonomy is going to come in first, and then filter down? The technology is pretty much already there, but I think back to what I said earlier on, the human perception, but it is only driven by cost, and ultimately, do poor people need to fly?
I mean, and perhaps it's a slightly artificial insight, but Christophe, if you had, if you could take out your pilot costs, how much bigger would your group be, or your operations be, or more pertinently, how much lower would your price point be? How much would that take out of your costs?
It depends on the overall utilization, but it's somewhere in the 20%. That's today, but that's definitely something that it's not a cost perspective. It's really it's a full requirement by the owners. It's part of the acceptance. When Will was mentioning that they ask who is the pilot and what are his ratings, when are his last training, the customers are looking for it, and they are still not ready in what we see today to get rid of them by far.
I think we might just have one more question from Steve. Steve, did you have a question?
I mean, everything we keep hearing is cost, right? And because the operator wants to get the cost down so that the thing can get more customers, right? So the end result is the customer wants the cheapest form of transportation. So if you had a helicopter that cost 3,000 pounds an hour, and you had an eVTOL next to it, which was autonomous, that you could take for 500 pounds an hour, okay, which one are you going to get on? And the question is different from a 20-year-old kid and a 60-year-old person. So I think that we're still thinking too old, and younger kids who, first of all, like all these other apps now, they're going for the cheaper way, free flying on the X JetSmart or whatever, and they're trying to fly for free. So if you're going to have all these opportunities to fly much, much cheaper, if it's autonomous, do you really think people are not going to do that? And what's going to happen to the helicopter industry? It's going to disappear.
I think you're right. The only thing is that there's unlikely to be a comparison with the distances that these will be able to fly initially. But you're absolutely right. What's going to happen? And actually, if you asked a Victorian if they'd ever get on a steam train without a driver, and yet now we can go around parts of London without a driver on a huge train, if we have the same question in 15, 20 years, I think it'd be a different answer.
Yeah, it will come, definitely.
I mean, Will, are you already seeing younger charter customers be, less concerned or inquisitive about the kind of, the age of the aircraft or the qualifications of the pilot? Or?
No, I mean, at the moment there are cheaper options. I mean, you can take your pick. You can take an R22 out of Battersea and a young pilot, or you can take an €8.5 million 169 with 2 pilots fully rated. People will pay for what they can afford. I think it's slightly artificial in the current market. I mean, the helicopters are so expensive, whatever level. But yeah, people are attracted by price. But for the upper end of most of our customers, actually, the cost is not so much an option. It's safety. That's all they're interested in.
Somebody has a G650 and they need to go from London to Nice, and they'll rent an XLS because even if they own the 650, because it's just much more economical.
Yeah, they would take that, but again, we've got clients that take BBJs London to Paris, and they've got a helicopter that will do it quicker, but it's convenience. Yeah.
But Glen, I mean, you fly, very light aircraft. Are you attracting a different type of, customer demographic because it is, relatively cheaper entry point to the industry?
So other, Revolution things apart from actually the vehicles that people are flying on is some of the technology being used by some of the brokers is the best way to describe them for online selling, etc. Which having an app on your phone, no one ever thought anyone would book a charter with an app. I haven't seen that actually translate into new people coming into the industry, which, if we're looking for Revolution, I think that's perhaps where it should be, to try and attract some more people to come in and use the technology, the infrastructure, and the things that we've got already, which are great. And it's interesting sitting back, listening to what some of these eVTOLs can do, which is exactly what helicopters do, albeit, again, back to cost. So cost will open up a slightly bigger market. New people coming in because of the technology and their interface with the market doesn't appear to have happened yet.
We probably need to wrap up. I think just to finish off, why don't we go from starting with Will? What in the next 3 or 4 years, automation will have most impact on what part of your operations, would you say?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to radically change just because the aircraft we're sat with at the moment are very slow to change. PBN is a whole different subject, but allows us to access a few more airfields. But yeah, not a huge change, I wouldn't think.
Christophe?
I think it's all the flight administration, the flight preparation, all these interface with all the B2B within the industry.
And Glen, to finish?
I can't see any of the automation changing much in what we currently do. I think that change will only happen when the pieces of metal or pieces of carbon fibre, as they will be, that we're using change. That's where the change will come. There's a lot of really interesting, fantastic projects that are looking at all of these options. And I think somebody once said that if you aim for the moon, if you miss, at least you'll hit the stars. I suspect some of these projects will end up in the dark abyss of space.
Happy note to end. Thank you. Thank you, audience.